The Anglo Saxons were a group of people that inhabited Great Britain coming from Germany and Norway or Scandinavia. The Germans would start invading Great Britain, which was part of the Roman Empire, in 450. Unfortunately, at this time they were illiterate, and the only records of this are from imagery and other societies' points of view. This would change in the year 500, and the literature they began to write would change even further around the year 600, becoming much more Christian. This was caused by the arrival of St. Augustine in 597, who converted most of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. This changed what they believed and what they wanted in their life. The Anglo-Saxons lived in Great Britain until the year 1100, when King William of Normandy finished his conquest by defeating King Harold's.
Life for Anglo-Saxons was very common to medieval times, life dominated by social structure and war. The Anglo-Saxon community in England was basically a rural one, where primarily all classes of society lived on the land. At the top of the social system was the royal house. This consisted of the king and princesses, who claimed the common ancestry with the king. They had special privileges and responsibilities, which included military service and command in the field. Succession to the throne was not a guarantee, as the Witan, or Council of Leaders, had the right to choose the best successor from the members of the royal house. Below the king were their ealdormen, the ruling nobility. The ealdorman was the king's viceroy in a shire, responsible for administration and justice, for calling out the Frid and leading its forces to the field. The office was not hereditary, but it became usual in the 10th century to choose ealdormen from a few outstanding families. The next class down the social ladder was the thane. Good service by a thane could resort to not only rich gifts, but sometimes the granting of lands, and on rare occasion, promotion to a higher class. Thanes formed the backbone of the Anglo-Saxon army. They held their lands from the king and could lose them, and sometimes their lives, if they did not answer the king's summons. Their service to the king was performed on a road, and they would accompany him everywhere, both as bodyguards and lesser officials. Thanes were primary warriors whose duty was to carry out the common burdens of service in the Frid, overseeing fortress work and bridge building. Below the Thanes were the Corals, freemen, farmers, and independent land householders who formed the mainstay of the Saxon kingdom, based as it was a rural economy. The term free in Anglo-Saxon context can be misleading, since there were many degrees of freedom. Corals were folk free, that is, free in the eyes of the community. They enjoyed wear guilds and had the right to seek compensations for other free kinsmen and kinswomen. They were allowed to bear arms and be considered Frid-worthy and moot-worthy. This meant they were considered worthy to serve in the Frid and take part in folk meetings. They did not have the same degree of freedom as Thanes and ealdormen. There were three main classes of Corals, all whom had different duties to their lord, ranging from paying rent to doing maintenance. The economy depended on slave labor, and although the Coral was a lowly peasant, they had the right and duty to serve in the Frid. All Corals would win promotion through prosperity or military service, and if, for example, a Coral possessed 5 hides of land, he became entitled to the rights of a thane.
During the Anglo-Saxon era, children began to be taught in Old English rather than Latin. Because of this, there are many Latin to Old English literary translations performed during this time. Old epics, poems, and many Christian texts are some of the most common artifacts of this era. Beowulf is the oldest surviving epic and the most well-known. It follows the battles of a young warrior, Beowulf, and highlights his noble and glorious outcomes against villains such as sea monsters and dragons who have been terrorizing villages. Other well-known texts include The Wanderer, The Seafarer, The Battle of Maldon, and The Dream of the Rood. Many books at this time also had heavy Christian overtones. These books include the Exeter Book, the Junius manuscript, and the Vercelli Book. While many authors at this time remain unknown or anonymous, there are 2 that we know for sure existed. Caedmon is a well-known Christian poet of this time. He used his experiences with Christianity for inspiration in his work and implied heavy Christian themes into his poems and manuscripts. Another well-known poet of this time is Cynewulf. He produced 4 well-known poems, each featuring many of the themes and common ideas of this time. However, very little is known about Cynewulf's personal life.
In the Anglo-Saxon era, glory was a major part of their culture. It was the reason that they fought bravely, and it was also the reason they were punished for not dying with their kings. To earn glory was the biggest and most important thing someone could do in this era. In literature, people in the Anglo-Saxon era use alliteration and kennings to provide a better flow and reduce awkwardness in their literature. They also use metaphors to convey the bigger messages of their stories so that people could understand them better in a better detailed way. People in the Anglo-Saxon era also gathered and had feasts. The reason they had feasts and gathered was to bring the community together and also to celebrate if positive things were happening. Feasts were also very important because they would have entertainment and the whole community would come together and tell stories and rejoice.